It's Skillin from Winnipeg Nightly Arts. I just wanted to make a quick video talking about the Zufechten and how to enter into the fight. This is the most dangerous and difficult part of fencing. You have to have a layered approach to how you enter into the fight and how you establish a bind and fight from there. So the most important thing is that you get into a range where you can't be hit with a counter hit while you're establishing your threat. So you stand at a further range from here, and essentially this is where you can start to pressure your opponent. If they don't react at all while you're establishing this cut, you get to here, cut with the arms. See how there's lots of space between us still? And then I'm reaching out all the way with my arms, and then I follow in with my body. Right? So arms, body, footwork. And so if you do that correctly, it will be very difficult for them to cut directly into you without establishing a bind. So the other thing that can happen is you begin to do your cut, and if they do start to cut into you, which will happen relatively late into this, if they try to cut into you from here, as they start to displace you, if you drive in and you just hold the center line, you won't necessarily hit where your initial target is, but if you maintain control, you will be able to hit them, right? And there's just a direct line in the thrust of the throat. If they do nothing again, you can just move in and cut. So if somebody's just holding the center, I was talking about this a little bit before. If somebody just cuts straight into your sword, you want to extend. Oftentimes you'll be above their sword. Ultimately what matters is that you just free your point, right? Is you just free this point to maintain contact and then thrust to a target in about here. You have kind of the face and chest area as your main targets. If they're cutting in, this is just kind of the standard Sonhao follow-up. Oftentimes, by just holding the center, as you move in, you'll be able to hit them in the head, torso area. So that's how you'd complete it more with a cut. This is when somebody, instead of going straight in, wants to just cut around to your other side. This is one of the main reasons that the Zufechten is so difficult to deal with, is because somebody can make it very ambiguous as to whether or not they're cutting directly to you or whether they're cutting around. So when they cut around, this is kind of how it happens. You feel like you're on track to hit them, they step off and they'll just cut around. When you start cutting, you get to about here, and you have to be looking at your opponent. You'll notice that their sword starts to move off to the left side. And what you have to do is you have to turn your sword to your right, and essentially you're trying to aim through their hands and to their head. This is quite difficult to do, and it's, even if you recognize it, sometimes it's a little bit too late, and then you see there he gets a little bit of contact with my head. So you can see again from here, I start to move the hands. I bring that foot up, but notice my body isn't really shifting forward yet. I provoke a response. And then from here, I see that Jeremiah's sword is starting to go to the left side. I notice that he's starting to cut around, and I cut through his arm towards his head. And you can see how my crossguard ends up here. I've actually turned my hands enough that I can jam in, and my crossguard would be ultimately protecting me from here. He kind of didn't have a very good angle because I stepped off, and how I hit him, it makes it awkward. So you're using a combination of movement and also turning that sword in order to do this. instead of doing a Zornhau as the opening cut, if you do a Schiel, you can kind of step off and just stab the opponent, right? That's a very strong option because you can transition from the Oberhau, from the Zornhau, into the Schielhau as you're recognizing this, and as you step off, it will give you a little bit more of a direct line of attack. So there I'm just showing kind of how you have to align the blade. You have to very much get into that lower right hanging, and you have to control that center. You're looking, if you get contact like this, you're looking to get this into their chest or throat, right? And that really helps with the alignment. And then this just has to be, essentially what it is there's a continuum from having your hands here in front of the hip to having them extended full out into Longenort. Somewhere between Longenort and somewhere between retracted at the hip is the right spot, and you just have to find it in the moment. That's why fencing is difficult. It's not that complicated, it's just hard. So, and you want to have this point directly in line with your target on this path from the hip to long point. So here Jeremiah starts to get that counter cut against somebody who decides to cut from the left. And he does a pretty good job. His footwork is a little off here, and he's obviously, that foot's dangling. He starts to correct it. One thing I would say is it's better to cut out earlier. It would be better if Jeremiah had cut earlier with his hands before stepping. See how here he's leaning in quite a bit? Like his body is going in front of his, it's transitioning this way in front of his feet. I would say it's better if you can reach the point of the sword out a little bit before. And then at this point, see, he's on line and straight in, right? This is what to do against somebody who tries to parry you and cut around off of the parry, right? This is kind of the basic idea. You cut into their sword and then you cut to their body. So I bind him down. I go through. And I cut around. I don't like doing this type of thing. I don't do it that much. I'm not great at it. Right? And so we were talking about how to deal with this, and I told him, if you feel someone doing this, you want to hold the center as much as possible, and you want to... There's multiple things you can do from here. If I was in this position, I would probably even attempt a Duplieren. So reaching my short, like turning my hands to my right side so that my short edge would be against this long edge here, and then attempting to thrust or cut the opponent's head. However, here what Jeremiah does is he winds up into my sword, into my parry, or rather into my counter attack. So the problem here is really this. We get this side displacement, and he's not actively pressing up. So I get this gap. And I have time, and I can cut, right? And he's pulling his hands back. Instead, what he should be doing is maintaining pressure and pushing forward. So we'll just keep going. Okay, so here, I cut into his sword, and what happens is my sword kind of goes all the way off. He gets into my hand. However, right, I'm just free to cut. And the problem is, if it's at speed, right, like this, it's not obvious that I just ran my sword along the edge of his sword. So odds are a judge might not notice that, and also you failed to defend, right? So for competition reasons, you don't want this to happen. And again, a lot of what happens here is this happens, and he's backing up instead of controlling the center. What I would say, he would be better off going forward and wind against my hands now, press my hands down. But he ends up backing up and trying to catch it. And I know what he's trying to do, and I just cut around into his arm, into his head, right? I know that that's an undefended cut, and we're practicing, so I didn't clock him, but, right? Again, from here, this is another thing that can happen. This is a thing that I really don't want to happen to me, where someone cuts around and they cut into your side. If they're nasty, they'll cut into your ribs. But you can see here, I cut around and below. This happens when you let them slide around like this, like slide off to the side, and you lose contact. He doesn't have a sword on my hands. He doesn't have a sword on my sword. He's not stopping. My sword is not under his control, and I can just sneak it in there. A much better way to deal with this scenario is once this happens, you don't let the opponent sneak off, and you just press in and drive your point, bury your point in them. And now they can't do all of that stuff. In this case, it flicked into my helmet, flicked into my mask. I wasn't in a position to cut to him immediately. So that's what you're trying to accomplish. Again, he's moving forward before cutting. I recommend really stick that sword out first. It really helps take up that space and bridge that distance, right? I'm trying to cut around off of that initial parry into his sword. Right? This leg should probably be actually pulling up closer together, loading up. That's something that we're working on, because this stance is quite long, and it's like very stable in this direction, like from here to here, right, along this line, but it's not stable left to right. And a lot of times what you're working on defending is somebody who's going to like push you sideways, push your sword sideways, and cut around. So if you load that back foot up, if I try to back out, he could apply more pressure. Here, because he didn't load up and he wasn't pressing forward, he left me an opening where just by going over top and pressing down, right, I won the position, right? So that's why just hanging out like that in that extended upper hanging, and not like pressing in. If he had shot in, it would have cut this possibility off from me entirely. This is a much better example of how to deal with this situation. Is you want to press in, right? And you drive in, and from here, if he transitioned into a thumb grip, he could be cutting at Sver under, right? Or he could be driving into my head, just as further follow-ups. But in this case, at least, he neutralizes this situation. He does overwind here. This cross guard should have been on the other side of my sword. It would have pinned me in better. But again, practice, it's hard to do things perfectly, right? So from here, right, my best option is kind of to turn out, and I actually put my sword where it should have been from the beginning. I'm turning towards him in order to reorient the bind. And from here, if he turned this point towards me, it would be a fairly neutral position. So again, from here, we have the bind. He's sticking to me this time. He's sticking to me, and he's just hit me in the mask. Right there. Right? Just like that. The important thing when doing this initial cut is you want to bridge the distance by moving your hands, then your body, and then your feet By doing that, you force the opponent to engage with your sword, and they either have to bind, cut around, or attempt to parry you. And from there, you start to be able to play off of what they're doing.